Okay, so your job is to kind of get the caucus in order. And obviously, you've been battling it out on two pieces of legislation critically over the past few months. One of them, the infrastructure package, which Joe Biden just signed this week. The other, what Biden refers to as the Build Back Better legislation. At this moment, as we speak, it looks like the future hangs in the balance for that legislation on the basis of a CBO score. Sort of, if you could lay out what your understanding is of the likeliness that this can pass the United States House of Representatives and what it depends on, because there were a number of sort of what is being referred to as the moderate bloc of the Democratic Party within the House who have said, hey, we need to see a score first. We need to figure out how much money this is actually going to cost the U.S. taxpayer, and of course, how much debt we might be going into to pass this. And so we're awaiting that. And we saw reports earlier this week that the CBO score is not going to match what the White House claimed it would be, that the White House was claiming, the president claiming that it would cost taxpayers nothing, that the cost would be zero, thanks to tax hikes on the rich, he said, as well as getting rid of, sort of the traditional waste, fraud, and abuse, going after tax cheats, for instance. But the early indicators are that the CBO score isn't going to be zero. We don't know what it ends up at, but what is your understanding of sort of the next steps here?
I believe that the House will pass it. I think the bigger challenge is the Senate. I mean, Josh Gottheimer was a moderate member of Congress from New Jersey, leading some of the moderates, saying that he actually trusts the Treasury's estimates much more on where the revenue will be on tax enforcement than the CBO. I never understood why there's such deference to the CBO. Republicans and Democrats, both administrations, usually criticize it. I actually don't find their analysis as good as many other economists. Now, fine, people want to look at it as one data point, fine. But ultimately, I think many of the moderates will look at it and say they trust the Treasury analysis more, and the moderates will vote for it. I think the bigger issue is,
why did they? I'm sorry, but why did they ask for a CBO score then if they're not going to trust its output?
I think they'll look at some of it, that they wanted to have independent verification, but that doesn't mean they're going to take it as holy grail, which, by the way, the Republicans did with the Trump tax cuts. I mean,
right.
You don't have the Nobel laureates going to the CBO, and their analysis on the minimum wage of the $15 was awful. It wouldn't. I mean, look, we could disagree. They're great economists at the University of Chicago, right against the minimum wage. They didn't cite half the relevant literature, so it wasn't that I disagreed with their conclusion. It's just, it's not always the best work product. That said, it's one work product. The moderates will look at it. I believe they will vote for it at the end of the day. But the Senate is a bigger challenge. And, obviously the president has to convince Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema to be on board. And that's something that is going to be up to him. And that, I think, is the harder bridge to cross.
Yeah, it seemed to me that the big challenge about taxing the rich is Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who are more or less in the pockets of the rich. So it would seem, we've seen actually the extreme wealthy get wealthier over the pandemic, while the rest of us struggled. They gained, I think, $1.8 trillion over the pandemic. The wealthiest, the billionaires, and it has increased they increased their wealth by 62%. But yet there are a lot of Republicans who say we can't tax the rich. So I'm wondering, what do you say to your colleagues? Because I'm sure you want to sometimes work across the aisle. And there are a lot of Republicans that call themselves populists. And you would think that left-wing populists and right-wing populists would be able to find some kind of common ground. What do you say to those that call themselves populists but still oppose things like paid family leave or affordable childcare, like from the GOP?
Well, I used a line. I said that the Republicans talk about family values and the Democrats value families, but I don't understand it. I mean, I understand why, if you value families, if you want parents to be able to raise their kids, if you want one parent possibly not to work and to raise their families, which is usually what a lot of Republicans say, why you wouldn't want to make that easier. That's all paid family leave is about. It's if your kid gets sick, you should be able to take off from work and look after your kids. If you have a parent who's sick, you should be able to do that. I don't understand why you wouldn't want childcare, so that you're helping working families. So you don't have this case where two parents are working till exhaustion and then not enough time to read to their kids or spend with their kids. These are pro-family policies. And some of the Republicans actually, have actually, Chris Burstick, for example, has supported the child tax allowance. There are pro-family Republicans who are for it. I would hope this is not a place that's partisan.
Yeah, I remember you had Mitt Romney's family plan that came out that was a pretty generous framework in terms of sending cash benefits to families. I do wonder, we've had a lot of big time government experiments that have taken place over the course of the last year when it comes to the types of money that we're sending out the door and the impact that it has on the average American and the American economy. And I've been wondering coming into this interview, Congressman, whether or not any of it made you reconsider any of your priors, like anything about your views has changed over the course of the last year, because I can tell you just from personal experience, going back into the 2020 timeframe of the pandemic, you look around, you see so many struggling Americans as a result of the shutdowns. And there was a lot of bipartisan concern for, okay, how do we get money out the door to Americans who need it? And it manifested itself in a number of these relief packages. But by the time the March relief package came out this year, $1.9 trillion, there was something like $1 trillion of money that had not yet been spent. And yet another $1.9 trillion was right behind it. And this package included a lot of things like extending unemployment benefits, like the extra unemployment benefits, and sending direct payments to families, especially people who have children, and putting a lot more money into the American economy that was printed by the Federal Reserve. And now we're seeing some of the inflationary impact of that. Biden saying that this week in Baltimore, saying, yeah, that March package, one of the ironies here is we send all this money out the door to take care of people, but it creates all this demand and slows the supply chains and increase the costs of everything. And so I wonder if, as you've watched this all go down, did all of this confirm your worldview, or is there anything that made you go, that's interesting. I'm thinking about this in a new way for the first time, having seen it played out in the public?
Well, look, let's say about $5 trillion of funding to get through the pandemic, which is a once in a generation crisis. $3 trillion of that was under Donald Trump. $2 trillion was under Biden. I believe that the $3 trillion wasn't. I voted for it because it was important to get money out, but I think it was too heavily skewed towards buying out and bailing out corporations, and too skewed towards buying back purchase assets of corporate bonds. I rather that we had put that money directly into working families and into the middle class, and maybe we could have saved some of the money and not have the asset bubbles, asset inflation that is part of the inflation. And I do think we should have, Larry Summers, others who know a lot about it. The inflation is often a monetary phenomena. Whether the Fed should be out there buying up corporate bonds, buying up housing bonds, if they've been doing it too long. I mean, those are questions that we should ask in terms of the Fed's role. And there are people who are far smarter than me about the Fed's role. But what I would have said is we needed the help for the working class and the middle class. I don't regret any of that, any of those votes. Maybe it should have been coupled with a different Fed policy, and I would have tailored the packages to be much more towards the working class and towards the middle class in how we approached it.